Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Tevin Gladney. I am the student body president for Green River Community College on the main campus. I'm here to introduce myself and also a few special recognitions. I have Kathleen. She is our Chief Justice here today. We also have Liz Reynolds, our mayor of Enumclaw. She's in the building today. Daryl Dixon, our councilman. He's also here. And David Namura, our moderator for today. I'm very excited to be here. This is my first time being at a political candidates forum. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to hear from our candidates. I'm also pleased to meet all of you today. So if you ever have a chance to talk to me, feel free. This is also, my first year being involved with student government, and I am excited to learn and to be the voice for our students for this year. Thank you for having me, and let's get ready to get this political forum going. So, thank you.
Great, thanks, Tevin. Well, good morning, everybody. How's everybody this morning? That's like a very enthusiastic round of response there for a political event at 8 o'clock in the morning. As Tevin mentioned, my name is Dave Namura. I'm the manager of local government affairs for Puget Sound Energy. PSE is a proud partner of both the city and the chamber, and we're really excited to be here to be able to moderate this event with you this morning. Maybe we'll just start just to give the candidates a sense of who's in the room. How many students are there from Green River? And chamber members? Okay, fantastic. So just to give a sense of our audience, a couple housekeeping items. There are little green sheets that have been passed around and or are available. If anybody has any questions, please submit them or please write them on the green sheet, and then some of the students with Tevin's help will help collect those, and we'll get those up to myself, and we'll try to get some of those questions in. The all important cell phone announcement. If you have any cell phones, just out of respect for the candidates and their time here with you this morning, please silence all cell phones. As you probably noticed, there's a camera in the back. You are being recorded, and ECTV will rebroadcast this forum this Friday. I think if you just check the scheduling, you will be able to replay this or rewatch this and share this information with your friends. And then for the candidates, just a little bit from a formatting structure. Each candidate will have 5 minutes to provide an introduction, an opening statement. We'll do that from the podium. Once we get through all of the introductions, we will then go into the Q&A portion. We have a list of questions here. Again, some questions will be submitted throughout the program. Every candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. There will be no rebuttal time. And we just ask the candidates to be respectful of those time limits so we can get through as many of these questions as possible and make this as informative for your voters as possible. The timer in the backstory has the cards there, and so we'll be, if you would just keep an eye on that, she will help you sort of keep on track, and I will be the hook if necessary. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started, and I'll invite Mr. Ritchie up, who's running in the 8th Congressional District.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. I am Jason Ritchie, and I am running in the 8th Congressional District, this district, to be your next representative, and that's a 2-year term to work in Washington, D.C., to represent everything from Issaquah, Sammamish, where I'm from, Auburn, Bonnie Lake, Buckley, Enumclaw, all the way over Covington, Maple Valley, over the hill to include, I've been to Cle Elum, Ellensburg, Wenatchee, Lake Chelan. It's a huge district. It's a diverse district. It's a purple district, meaning it is almost evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. It is one of only 17 congressional districts nationwide that voted for President Obama. President Obama won the 8th district, but has a Republican, currently Representative Dave Reichert, in that seat. It's drawn to be competitive, and that's, to me, is a good thing. All of our congressional districts, whether they're red or blue, should be more purple. I think we could get better, more moderate people fighting for more moderate issues and willing to compromise and get things done for everybody when we do that. So little bit about me. I am trained as a school teacher. I taught at community college level for 5 years, and my father had a stroke, went in for knee replacement surgery, and my family's life kind of got turned upside down, and went back and figured out that when you have a stroke and you're running your own law firm like my father was, Social Security and disability do not automatically activate. You have to actually prove that you're physically challenged enough, if you're under 65, to actually get the benefits that you've earned. Social Security and Medicare, these are earned benefits. These are not privatized things. These are not to be gambled on the stock market. These are earned benefits. Getting those activated for my father was a huge challenge. First step. Second step, this is the Affordable Care Act, pre-Affordable Care Act, pre-Obamacare. When you don't pay your insurance bill 1 month, your health insurance stops cold. If you're working for a small business or you're working for yourself, you have your own insurance. There aren't a lot of options. Health insurance stops, hospital says go home. That's where I stepped in. Let's get Dad home from the hospital when he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. How does that work? So I started building ramps, lifts, grab bars in his home. And that has now, 8-9 years later, grown into a small business, my small business, Handy Habitats, where I work with the VA, labor and industry, nationwide actually, to help people live at home safely and comfortably with physical challenges. I love what I do. It's a great job. Makes me feel very connected to my community. I feel like I'm earning my oxygen every day. A year ago this month actually, the government shut down. Part of my business is working with the Small Business Administration. So when you have a little construction company, you can't just run over the Bank of America or Wells Fargo and say, I need a loan. You get laughed out of the building. They want collateral. It doesn't work that way. You have to actually go to organizations like the SBA Small Business Loan Program. It's a wonderful organization, government working with business, helping each other, growing the economy. This is how it's supposed to work. That organization, the SBA, stopped cold during that government shutdown that was over partisan politics. Like the Affordable Care Act, don't like the Affordable Care Act. You don't shut down the government. You don't take your toys and go home just because you don't get your way. Democrats win fights, Democrats lose fights. Republicans win fights, Republicans lose fight. You can't stop fighting for the people in your district. That's my big issue right now. We're not out here fighting for people in our district. There's a disconnect between what goes on in Washington, D.C. and what goes on here in Enumclaw or in the 8th District or in Washington State. That's not right. So I'm running for a couple very simple ideas. One, keep the government open, keep things going, keep the process open. Middle-class living wage jobs. We're not spending enough time building middle-class living wage jobs in our communities. This is what I do. I have people that work with me, not for me. We're all in this together. I want to make sure we're building middle-class living wage jobs in our communities every single day. What are we doing to make that happen? We need to build infrastructure reinvestment. I mean, you guys, Enumclaw is a major transportation hub. We need to make sure that there are more transportation dollars. This is a growing community. Schools, bridges, roads, electrical grid. These are trades, electricians, plumbers, craftsmen. Building those jobs in our communities attract private industry into these communities, and it grows our economy. There needs to be a relationship, not an adversarial relationship, a working relationship between government and private business. And that's what I do every day. So you're going to get your ballots here in a couple days. I'll ask for your vote, but make sure you vote no matter who you vote for. We need more turnout than we had in our primaries. So thank you for participating.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we'll turn it over to Representative Dahlquist.
Thank you to the Chamber and to Green River and to the students for sponsoring this today. I really appreciate being here. We do several forums during campaign season, and this, I always say, is my favorite one because I always recognize a lot of faces in the audience. I don't know if that's good or bad. But anyway, thank you for showing up this early in the morning. For those of you who don't know me, I have served this community and the school board level for 2 terms, actually 6 years, prior to being elected 4 years ago to the State House. I served in the legislature, and I went on to that position because I saw that more and more of the decisions, especially around education, were coming from the state, and mainly around funding and unfunded mandates. As the state layered upon layer of mandates upon schools and requirements as to do this or do that or not get funding, or do this or do that and you get no funding. So running for the State House and serving in the Education Committee, and the last 2 years I've been honored to serve as the ranking member on the Education Committee, I found it really, really important. And we came up with a lot of good bills that got passed in the last 4 years that really drove student achievement. It made teachers and students all accountable, and we thought that it was some really good choices for what came out for students and student outcomes. I chose to do this. I'm not a career lifetime politician. I come from the private sector, excuse me. I worked for a Fortune 500 company for, about 20 years before owning a small business for 12 years. So I've actually signed the check to a paycheck. I've not just received a paycheck from the government. So I think it's really important to bring different perspectives into this job, not just from the private sector, but also as a public servant on the school board, understanding how those budgets work, understanding how those budgets affect teachers and our staff, and how those budgets affect students. So for me, that was very, very important. I served in a leadership role in the House Republican Party. I served as the minority assistant whip. That doesn't mean you hold a crop like we think about when we're in Enumclaw riding a horse, but it means that we sit in the leadership meetings and help make decisions. So it's a really important position. I served in that capacity for 2 years, and then, like I said, as the ranking member on the House Education Committee for the last 2 sessions. As we move forward, one of the other things that I gained while being in the House was I went back to school. I got put on a committee that's called the Technology, Energy, and Communications Committee. And like you students in here, we're all what I call lifetime learners, right? So even at my age, I went back to school and I earned an executive master's in energy because I was making decisions for people in the state on energy that could impact you for years to come. But honestly, I didn't feel like I was knowledgeable. So I think it's really important for you guys to understand that it's not just about your education ending when you finished high school or finish a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree or a tech school. You'll be learning and hopefully pushing yourselves your entire lifetimes. So that's what I would encourage you as students to do. It's what we do in the legislature. I think it's really important. Education certainly is power. And so I took that executive master's in energy and served for the last 4 years on that committee. Was able to make what I thought were intelligent, educated decisions as opposed to just hearing from both sides, lobbyists and whatnot to help us make decisions and influence us. The other committees that I've sat on are the Appropriations Committee. Appropriations are the budget. And that's where all the money comes. And the reason I was put on there is because I helped write a budget with Democrats in a bipartisan way. I am a Republican. I was the only Republican allowed in the room to help write that education budget in 2013. They wanted to know what programs worked, what was successful. And what I'll say to you is it was an honor to be there. We were able to invest another $1 billion. That will be our challenge for the future. We have about almost $3 billion to reinvest into education over the next 2 years. And I will be that advocate for you, for the students and the people of this community and of the state as we continue to move forward on education. So thank you again today.
Thank you very much. Now I'll introduce Senator Roach.
Well, thank you very much. It's obviously a pleasure to be here. I want to correct the record. The reason Cathy ran was because I asked her to run. I recruited her. She wasn't out looking for the job. I thought that there would be someone that would represent the district in a way that we could be proud. She was there for 2 months and came back to me that, Pam Roach just won't move over. So there you go. I wanted to set that record straight. Now, I've enjoyed being the senator here in the district, worked very hard for you, and I want to talk to you about why I'm running again and why I'm hoping that you'll support me in this election. First of all, there are just a couple things that legislators must do. And one of those things is vote for their constituents. And usually in my campaigns, no one ever says anything about the way I vote, because I vote the district. And that's the most important thing a legislator can do, is represent you and represent you well. But there's also another dynamic to being elected official, and that is whether or not you're willing to spend your off time, if you will, the time you're not in Olympia, here at home, helping the people here. And I'm glad we're having the meeting in Enumclaw, but I could have these comments for other areas, like the Lake Tapps area, where for the last 14 years, after leading the fight to save Lake Tapps, I'm still there and have managed with my son Dan, who's the chair of the Pierce County Council, to make sure that there were no new setbacks with the Shoreline Management Act. I'm still there working with them after 14 years. Here in this community, when there was going to be a hospital annexation possibility by the Valley Medical, I was asked by the community to chair the committee to stop that annexation. And it helped because we won with a 94.4% no vote. That made state history. And there are people in this room, talk about bipartisan, on both sides of the aisle that fought against that annexation. But I was asked to chair the committee. When we have farmers that have problems with too many elk, which we have right now, I have a group together working now. We've got WDFW trying to do the help. When there's a roundabout out on the highway that the people here don't want, if you'd wanted it, that's one thing. But when you don't want it, that's another. So I led the charge to make sure that, in fact, you got what you wanted, which is you didn't want it. Didn't see big trucks going around that thing. We didn't want to be the experiment for other places down the highway. So I think it's really important of that dynamic. I don't think my opponent has done anything in the community except work on a school board. And I want to, it's a hope that it'll come up on the, in our discussions about the huge tax increases that will come about by way of the work that she gave you on that school board. Because you need to know, it's been very quiet, no one's talked about it, but you're going to be responsible for building 6 to 7 new schools in Black Diamond. And that means you'll be asked to pay for it. We can talk about that, I hope we will. In the meantime, I have things I want to do in Olympia. I want to make sure that we protect the initiative and referendum process. I'm a stalwart as chair of the Governmental Operations Committee in issues that deal with elections. And unlike my opponent, I want to make sure you have that unfettered ability to get things on the ballot, because whether you're conservative or liberal or somewhere in between, you cherish that right that we have as our constitutional privilege. I want to let you know that I'm working on a new state park. It's come back up again, proud to tell you that, working with Puget Sound Energy to make sure we can use some of that property between King and Pierce County that is around the White River. I worked on that several years ago, and I'm still there for you on that. Haven't forgotten it, haven't let it drop. I'll be working also to open up our public meetings, because right now smaller committees at a city level are not open to the public, and they should be. Want to make sure that we have some languages in our elementary schools. There's going to be a lot of money put in education. I'm supportive of that, of course. But I think we need to be looking at developing our children in a way that will make them a little more competitive in the world market, give them opportunities to develop their brains, quite frankly, whether it's music or computers or languages. We want our kids to learn. And I think my time is about up, but I want to let you know that in our schools today, they don't even teach cursive. Now, maybe there are some teachers that do. But I was here in Enumclaw, I think it was Monday night, last night maybe, where we had a hearing dealing with pit bulls. And the kids were seated all on the floor, and I was kind of navigating my way through, and this was a class, they were taking notes. And just for the heck of it, I looked down, and sure enough, everyone was printing. No one knows cursive. And I think it's something that the public does not know. It's a part of Common Core. It's something that both the WEA and I agree that we shouldn't have this. So we'll talk about it a little later. I am supported by Republicans, Democrats. When we talk about bipartisan, it's Pam Roach, who has the endorsement of the Association of Washington Business, who has a 100% voting record with the National NFIB, National Federation of Independent Business. And yet I am the only Republican running for Senate in the state of Washington that has the endorsement of the Washington State Labor Council. There's nobody more bipartisan than me. And I'm very effective, and we'll talk about that hopefully as some of the questions come up. You cannot be effective in Olympia unless you are bipartisan. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now we'll move on to the State House. Seat 1, we'll start with Mr. Stokesbary.
Good morning, and thanks for everybody for coming out. Thank you very much to the Enumclaw Chamber of Commerce and Green River Community College for putting on this event, and thanks, David, for spending your morning out with us. I knock on a lot of people's doors, and not everybody wants to talk to politicians, so waking up this early to come here from 8 politicians at once definitely shows some commitment to the civic process, so I appreciate that. My name is Drew Stokesbary, like David said. I was born here in the Puget Sound and grew up here. I've lived here my entire life. Except for the 7 years that I've spent in college. I went to school in North Carolina for 4 years where I received a Bachelor of Science degree in economics. And then I went again to the Midwest where I got a law degree from the University of Notre Dame. In between law school and undergrad, I moved from my home down in Olympia to here in southeast King County while I worked on a variety of political campaigns. I kind of caught the political bug. As you can see, it hasn't left me yet. You know, coming out of college with an economics degree, a lot of my classmates were going to work for big banks on Wall Street, and I thought about doing that, but realized that I really liked this community. I really wanted to make a difference. I really liked politics. As a young kid, I could work for pizza for lunch and practically nothing else, so I kind of eschewed staying on the East Coast and decided to come back here, where I worked for a couple years before going off to law school. And then after law school, I got a job as a policy aide at the King County Council, which is where I work now. Anyway, let me share a little bit about some of my ideas for Olympia. And it's not often that you get the Chamber of Commerce and a bunch of college students in a room together. They're not necessarily natural allies, but it actually fits very nicely with my top 2 priorities for the legislature. The first is education. If you're following the news at all, you know that the Supreme Court of Washington has ordered the legislature to pay several extra $1 billion into K-12 education. And, you know, frankly, they were right. The state budget has grown significantly over the last 10 or 20 years, but all of that money has gone into everything but education. If you compare non-education budget growth to education budget growth, education funding has just stayed flat, but everything else has gone through the roof. And that really shortchanges our kids, and we need to make sure we fix that. There's a couple ways we can do that. The first is, as our economy continues to grow and we recover from the recession, sales tax receipts and B&O taxes will just naturally increase, and we need to put as much of that new money into education as possible. Second, now that marijuana is legal, that is going to create a significant revenue stream for the state. And after we take care of all the public safety aspects of complying with that law, I think we need to devote as much of that revenue into the education system as possible. Lastly, you know, there's all sorts of tax loopholes on the books, and this can be a tricky issue because, for example, when you go buy groceries at the grocery store, you don't pay sales tax on that. Technically, that's a sales tax. Technically, that's a tax loophole. Obviously, we don't want to change that. But there's definitely some loopholes out there that maybe we can address to come up with the extra money that we need to fully fund education. But we can't just write a bigger check. If all we do is write a bigger check, then in 10 or 20 years, there's going to be a McCleary 2.0 Supreme Court decision telling the legislature again that you didn't spend enough money on education. So we have to make sure we're using this money efficiently. We have to reform some of the ways we're doing education. And I hope to talk to you guys about that as the forum goes on. Lastly, with regard to education, I just want to let you know that I'm endorsed by 2 of the biggest education groups in the state, the League of Education Voters, which is a primarily Democrat organization, to be honest. They only endorse 4 Republicans running for the state house. I'm one of them. And then also Stand for Children, which endorsed almost exactly an equal number of candidates from each party. In addition to fully funding and reforming education, I also want to be an advocate for businesses and especially small businesses. As an attorney, in my free time, at least the free time that existed before I had a kid 5 months ago and ran for office 6 months ago, I work with small businesses and help them deal with a variety of issues, dealing with L&I, employment security, Department of Revenue, things like that. And I want to really promote economic growth. I think my background in economics and then my law degree will really enable me to do that. I'm endorsed by virtually every business organization in the state, the Association of Washington Business, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Auburn Area Chamber of Commerce. I want to make L&I easier to work with. I want to come up with a tax code that is either simple or fair. I think the one we have right now doesn't accomplish either of those goals. And I want to make sure that health insurance is affordable for small businesses. So, you know, in conclusion, I'm looking forward to talking about some more issues. I know I'm young. I'm probably younger than a couple of the college kids in the audience. But the Seattle Times endorsed me and they said that I was exceptionally well qualified. So I think I have what it takes to be an effective voice in Olympia. And again, I thank you for all your time.
Great, thank you. Now we'll hear from Councilmember Mike Sando.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see so many young people. It makes me feel a lot more comfortable being a teacher and a coach here in the community. I haven't been a teacher my whole career. This is actually my second career. My first career I spent working for the state legislature. I worked for State Senator Valora Loveland, who was from Pasco. A great lady, great mentor, taught me just about everything I know about state government. And 20 years ago, I was working for her. And in Olympia, we had the ability to work with people, and we worked for the best interest of our constituents. We worked across the aisle, and we focused on things that benefited the community, benefited our communities. And it wasn't a provincial thing, it wasn't a partisan thing, it was what was the best thing to do. And I think we've gotten away from that. Sometimes we spend a little too much time bickering, a little too much time with gridlock, and a little too much time looking for easy solutions to problems. And I think that we need to change that. And I'd like to go to Olympia and work on that. For example, we used to build coalitions with other legislators. I don't know if you remember the folks like Jim Jesernig and Eugene Prince and some of these titans, Irv Newhouse. They worked on things like regulatory reform, and they tried to make things easier for people dealing with the state. So many times we had farmers or business people or developers that would go to the state, they'd get one answer from the Department of Health and another answer from the Department of Ecology, and they conflicted. Well, we were working on that and trying to make things better, and it was not a Republican issue, it was not a Democratic issue, it was not an urban issue, it was not a rural issue, it was a Washington issue, and we worked on it, and it was very exciting for me to work on that as a staff person, and I learned that, and I'd like to get back to that in Olympia. I'm looking at these things, and education and transportation comes up quite a bit. And obviously we're going to have to address those two big issues. And I'd like to take that idea of the regulatory reform that we worked on in the 90s and try to unite groups the same way we did across the aisle and across the state to fix some of these problems. I think we're over-testing our kids. I think it's costing us millions of dollars. We're spending way too much time on it. I sound like a broken record for these guys up here. My opponent mentioned two groups, the League of Education Voters and Stanford Children. And those are two groups that are staunch proponents of this testing regime. They're the ones that want to bring you more tests. I'm not opposed to testing to find out where we're at as a barometer, but the thing is we're spending millions and millions of dollars to test and over-test. For example, if you take one test testing window during the year, a week, and then you add 3-4 weeks to prepare the kid for that one test, and you prorate that across the time, you took a whole year's of instruction away from that kid. That's a shame. That's a shame. The testing is one part of it, but there's also red tape associated with education. There's so many regulations. We're all talking about it, about what we're doing to schools and adding to the cost, and I think we can save a lot of money. We're going to have to figure out how that works. We're also going to have to reform things that we do in transportation, and in the same sense, we need to work on making it easier and less expensive to build roads, and there's a number of thoughtful reforms from both sides of the aisle that will help us get there. We need to compromise on that and work on that, because if we don't do things like finish 167, we're not going to realize the growth in the economy that we know we can have. And that growth in the economy is what's going to help us get out of the education problems that we have. So if we need to work together, we need to work across the aisle, we need to have common sense reforms, we need to look at what we're doing, we need to be more efficient, we need to work on all of these things and stop the bickering and get together. You know, it needs to be Democrats, it needs to be Republicans, it needs to be rural legislators, it needs to be urban legislators, and they need to be thinking as Washington legislators. That's all I have to say. I look forward to answering any of your questions. This has been really an excellent experience for me, getting out and talking to people, because it really kind of energizes me to kind of try to figure out what's going on and try to make things better for our kids and for our communities. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Phil Fortunato, who's running for position 2.
Good morning. My name is Phil Fortunato. I'd like to introduce myself as someone who's had his first business when I was 18 years old. In my entire adult life, I've actually only worked for somebody 1 year. So I've always written a paycheck. I've always written the B&O tax check, which incenses me every quarter. And so I'm familiar with what small business is encountering. I was elected as a state representative in 1998 in the 47th district, which is the adjoining district. So Chris and I were actually elected together. Some of the things that I've accomplished when I was the state representative, I see some of you young college kids are here. When you were 16 years old, if you got a license and you got a ticket, your parents would have got a notice in the mail because of me. Now, you would think that that is a pretty common sense thing. They come in and they say, 16-year-old kids are killing people, to which I respond, why are you giving them a license if you're telling me they're killing people? Now, the only solution is to spend $5 million more on driver's ed. And I said, that's stupid. Just tell the parents if the kid gets a ticket, they'll take the keys away. And apparently, you can't put parent and notification in the same sentence. I drafted the amendment, and it said parent, guardian, or employer can sign for a kid to get a license. So parent, guardian, employer would get a notice. This turned into an abortion issue in the Transportation Committee because parent and notification were in the same sentence. Now, all the pro-life people voted yes, all the pro-choice people voted no, and the amendment failed. And, by the way, my opponent voted no. I redrafted the amendment. I sent flowers to the Democrat chairwoman in charge. I made an appointment with her, and she said, I'm not going to support your amendment. And I said, would I ask you to do that? Would I ask you to go against your principles? I'm just going to ask you not to oppose it. So anyway, they redrafted the amendment to say the authorizing party would get notified, and that passed on the House floor without a hitch. That's how crazy things are in Olympia. Anybody here have a 13-year-old kid? You need to get their medical or their permission to get medical information about your own child. Now this is madness. I drafted a piece of legislation that said you cannot withhold medical information about children from parents. They didn't have to tell them, but if they asked, you couldn't withhold that information. My opponent, the Democratic opponent at the time, put out a hit piece that said he sponsored legislation to allow patient information to be divulged without their consent. Somebody said, did you do that? I go, you're damn right I did. He's just leaving one tiny little bit of information out. That patient is your child, and the information is to you, the parent. So when you're dealing with politics and things like that, words don't mean the same thing. So it makes me laugh as a small business guy. Okay, I started mowing lawns, putting lawnmowers in the back of my dad's car and all this stuff. My first job was to pull weeds for $200. It took us 2.5 weeks. The guy felt so bad, he gave us $400. This is 1970-something, so it's a lot of money. But it makes me laugh when somebody says, does anybody here believe that government creates jobs? Anybody? I mean, government doesn't create jobs. We create jobs. The best thing government could do is get the hell out of the way. I want less regulation. I want the government to get out of my way. I want to hire people. I want to create jobs. I can't do that with government imposing all kinds of regulations. No business in this room could stay in business if every state and federal agency came into your organization and enforced all the regulations. Transportation is the lifeblood of our economy. Without a good transportation package, we're sunk. Why does Boeing want to leave every other week, right? We don't have a viable transportation package. You cannot fund transportation anymore with the gas tax being gas tax when gas is $3, $4 a gallon. My proposal was to dedicate the sales tax from the sale of motor vehicles so that you have an inflation-linked funding source that would increase with inflation. People are going to buy more cars. They're going to buy electric cars. that revenue stream would increase as the cost of construction increases with inflation, and you wouldn't have to keep raising the gas tax every other week. My opponent's solution is to index the gas tax so that it increases automatically, so that you don't even notice it and nobody has to vote on it. So I'm opposed to that. I'm opposed to when somebody says, are you willing to compromise? Absolutely. You compromise with me, I'm a happy guy. My job isn't to compromise with the other guy. My job is to make the other guy compromise with me. I got to get him to cross that 51% line. And that's what I intend to do as your state representative. Thank you. Now I could take my opponent's 5 minutes since he's not here, and I can answer for him.
No, I'm going to take up that time here. Thank you. So, is there a representative from Representative Hurst's office? So, seeing none, we'll just move into the Q&A part. So, just a quick reminder: there's some green pieces of paper that are floating around the room. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to write them down and get them to one of the students. And we will try to work some of those into our questioning today. So one of the things that I want to point out is that a lot of the students in the room are part of a public speaking class. Well, actually, let me take a step back. So there's microphones on the table. So I'm going to stand up here and occupy this mic. We'll answer questions from the seated position. I believe all the mics are on. So the public speaking class that's here today, I think, is very interested in sort of public speaking skills, and obviously as elected officials and or as candidates who are probably nightly having to speak to groups. What do you think are the key components of good public speaking? And if you could just give some advice to some of these students about what they should be looking for as far as getting skills out of their classes to increase their skill sets. Well, why don't we start with that? Start with Mr. Sando.
Oh, public speaking. To be an effective public speaker, you need to know what you're going to say. And it comes from writing as well. When you're writing, you need to go, okay, pre-write. So many kids sit down and they just start writing what their paper is. But be cognizant of what you want to say. Put it in bullets. Do your pre-write. Put it into bullets and make sure that you stick to 1, 2, 3. And then tell them what you're going to say. Tell them, and then tell them what you said.
I would say know your audience. So today, our audience is a mixture of chamber business owners and students. So what did I talk about? I talked about education, the things that are relevant to you. I talked about education. I talked to you about my small business experience, and I talked to you about my corporate experience. Didn't talk so much about what I do in the legislature, other than to give you a little background. So I think it's really important that you know your audience before you start speaking, because you want to speak to them. I could stand up here and talk to the students about tax burdens and B&O and F&O, and you don't know what the heck I'm talking about because you've not experienced that yet. So I think it's really important to know your audience.
I agree, and I'll also say that to a certain extent, public speaking is a conversation. It's not speech giving. You have to be able to look at people and see, am I making contact? Is what I'm saying being heard? Is it actually making a difference? Are people shaking their heads, oh, this guy's nuts? Or are they saying, yeah, I think this guy knows what he may have a good point? Keep going with that stuff. That's how public speaking is a conversation. It's not one person, one way. It's a back and forth.
Senator Roach?
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, I think you should speak to the audience, but we have a camera here today. This audience would be the people of the plateau, really, everyone on the plateau that gets our cable. I'm speaking to everyone. I'm speaking to that farmer who is worried about too many elk on his field. I'm talking to that individual who didn't want to pay a tax to Valley Medical. I'm talking to people who want to see what a legislator is really about. I'm talking with passion. So yes, I agree, know your subject. Yes, I agree that you say it again, then tell them what you said. That's, public speaking 101. But you know what? I think you have to kind of be interesting. And I think people like to have somebody talking to them that not only knows their subject, but is passionate about what they are doing and what they believe. Because when it comes from the heart, you have a special bonding with that person with whom you're speaking. And for me, I hope that comes across. I love the people of the Plateau and the people of the district, and I hope that comes through. I also think that I have a responsibility. So a speaker has a responsibility, and that responsibility is to inform the audience in this case. So some things you have to say that aren't maybe very pleasant. Some things you get to brag about the things you've been doing, because it's your responsibility to let the audience know what you've been doing, what you plan to do, and maybe a little bit about what your opponent does or does not do. That's the responsibility the speaker here we have today. So with that, I don't think I need to use my whole part of it. But there we go. Thank you very much. Got your own.
How to be a good public speaker, I guess I'll let you know when I figure it out. So sure, I guess one tip would be add in a little bit of self-deprecating humor. Other than that, I think actually I'm going to agree with a lot with what Mike said. Kind of plan out ahead of time what you want to say. One thing that I think we need to do, and this is something that I know I need to do, is practice what you're going to say a lot before you say it. I know sometimes we think that maybe we're smart enough to figure out on our feet, but I don't think it always comes across that way to the person listening. So if you can practice what you want to say and say it enough times, it'll kind of become second nature. So that can go a long ways. In Olympia, I'm not going to be the guy who gives fire and brimstone speeches that everybody shares on YouTube. I'm going to be the guy sitting quietly with the smartest people in the room trying to figure out the best solution. So, I'm not totally worried about public speaking right now, but I'm glad to see that there's some college students who are trying to learn these skills at an early age.
I guess if I was going to give some advice about public speaking, it would be that you can continue on in a monotone voice, saying all kinds of very nice official things, or you can be impassioned about what you're believing. You can look people in the eye, you can interact with the audience, and I will say, you know how to keep a Italian quiet, and that's tie his hands together. So anyway, it's that personal interaction.
Great, thank you. So, Mr. Ritchie, we're going to start with you today, since I think a lot of the conversation for the rest of our time here is probably going to be focused on state issues. But on the federal level, obviously, there's a lot of stalemate in Congress right now. And Congress, I think, is at its lowest approval rating in history at about 20%. Does that sound about right? So I'll forego asking you the question of why you'd want to join the ranks of people who are actually viewed lower than lobbyists, such as myself. And maybe start with a topic of, or the question of, how will your style affect the ongoings of Congress, and what do you think you're going to bring that will be different as far as creating a congressional body that is functional?
A congressional body that is functional. Well, I think that I'm not looking to run and make Congress functional. I'm looking to represent the people in the 8th District better than their current representative has in the past 10 years. I'm simply running on an idea that it's time for a change, it's time for a new direction, that we haven't been getting the benefit of our tax dollars. We spend more money in tax dollars going out, federal tax dollars, than we get coming back in. I think that's completely wrong. We should not be doing that. We're not supposed to supplement other states. We're supposed to be getting our tax dollars back in infrastructure reinvestment and jobs and education dollars back in from our federal government. It's not happening. So I believe there is a lot of dysfunction in D.C. I'll say this briefly, that I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that our congressional districts are drawn, as I mentioned, they're drawn so starkly blue and starkly red. And until we have a consensus in this country where we're drawing districts that are meant to be competitive and meant to be purple, we're not going to have deal makers. We're going to have people that are going to be so partisan, left or right, that they're not willing to take a business perspective and say, look, I need to get this done. What do I got to do to make this deal happen? How do you move this piece of legislation forward, the greatest good for the greatest many people, the greatest amount of people in our community? That is what we should be focusing on. And right now, Republicans, Democrats in D.C. are not doing that. And that's a different conversation for a different day.
Okay, great. Thank you. So obviously, everybody has touched on education and education funding. So why don't we just start right there? And there's an initiative on the ballot this year that's addressing class sizes. And so, two-part question: one, where do you stand on the initiative? I believe it's 1351, and 2, with the McCleary decision coming down the pipe and obvious need to shore up an extra $1 billion for education, where does that come from? So maybe Mr. Fortunato, we'll start with you.
Well, first on the McCleary decision, I want to know where the heck the Supreme Court gets off being a super legislature. So I personally disagree with the fact that the Supreme Court, I don't have a problem with them saying you didn't fully fund education. My problem is them coming up with some magic number that they picked up out of the air based on some committee or whatever, and saying this is the number that you need, and then you'll fully fund education. Now, because of the contempt issue, I believe you elect people to go to Olympia to spend your money and make your laws. They have to make tough choices. They have to make tough decisions. They have to argue back and forth on what they want to do, whether they want to raise taxes or not raise taxes. And when people talk about a lack of compromise, I want to point out that when the legislature is in gridlock, at least we are safe. They haven't done anything bad. They may not have done anything good, but they didn't raise our taxes, they didn't pass an income tax, et cetera. So the art of compromise is to get the other guy to come your way. And when you're dealing with that, how are we going to deal with this contempt issue from the Supreme Court? My suggestion is we need to come up with 2 proposals, and we need to put them to the vote of the people. And we need to do that because of this Supreme Court contempt. One says we are going to fund education this much, we're going to cut this spending, we're going to do this, we're going to cut regulations, it's not going to increase taxes. The other is going to say, okay, we're going to raise taxes, we're going to do this, we're going to do whatever it takes to meet this requirement. And then the people vote on it. If the people vote and they say, okay, we don't want to raise taxes, we want to go with this reduced regulation, to me, that's the people of the state of Washington saying that that's fully funding education. If they want to raise taxes and they vote on it, then that's their decision that they need to do that. I believe the legislature should be making that decision, however.
Right. Thank you. We'll just go down the row.
So first, with regard to Initiative 1351, which would reduce class sizes, I'm opposed to it, and I hope that everybody in this room will vote against it, and everybody watching on TV will vote against it. And let me explain why. It's not because smaller class sizes are bad, but it's not that it's that they're not that good. They don't really help that much. One of the beauties of our federal system is that we have thousands of school districts around the country, each doing education a little bit differently. So we have lots of data on class sizes. A smaller class size makes some difference in kindergarten through 3rd grade, but once you get to about 4th grade and beyond, it doesn't really have any impact on student outcomes. So I would be a firm supporter of reducing class sizes in grades K through 3, and the legislature's already passed some legislation to get us there within the next couple years. But further reducing class sizes in grades 4 through 12 will carry a big financial cost, and it won't actually increase student learning at all. So that doesn't seem to be a very wise use of our dollars right now in this kind of economic recession that we're trying to dig our way out of. With regard to McCleary funding, I talked a little bit about how I would get that money, and let me respond to something my opponent said. He's said, and he'll probably say again, that we can save some money by reducing testing. The problem with that is federal law requires that we test students every year from grades 3 through 8, and then once again in high school. So if we want to reduce testing, that's fine, but he should run for Congress like Mr. Ritchie. In the state, we have to have a test no matter what. The test that we have right now is actually saving us a lot of money relative to the test that we had beforehand. It's saving us about $35 million a year. So while he's going to talk about we can eliminate this and save us $50 million a year, the problem is there's not a viable alternative that wouldn't cost us even more money. So he says save $50 million, but it will actually cost us $35 million a year. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think the way to solve the McCleary funding issue is to use all of the new sales tax and business and occupation tax revenue that's going to come into the state coffers as the economy grows. There's $600 million in the bank right now that will continue to go up, and we need to put at least 3/4 of that into education. Thanks.
Senator Roach.
Well, thank you. So a lot of good subjects here. First of all, we wouldn't have so many problems if we had more money in the bank, right? If we had more revenue in the state. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that we have a strong and viable economy, and thankfully it's kicking back in. There are a lot of reforms we need to make in business, a lot of reforms that we need to make in the way we help create business, because over time we need to raise the income level, and that, in fact, will help us. We did notice a revenue increase. We had one last year. And as a member of the Majority Coalition Caucus, I'm proud to say that we were the ones that led the way for a $1.1 billion increase in education spending. This was higher than what the House had wanted. They wanted $900 million. But we insisted. The compromise did affect, and we went to the 1.1. And we'll be able to do that again this year. It doesn't have to be done overnight. We have until, I think, 2017 to make sure we've met the mandates. And I'm confident that we will. But in doing so, we have a lot of people with needs, and I think that we need to make sure that we're looking at the other parts of the budget also. So it's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen. As far as 1351, I think it's going to pass, and I think that it's a very laudable goal to have this class sizes reduced. And I happen to think that even if it is true, and I believe it is, that it's more effective at the lower level grades, it's really important that we not overburden teachers with all the extra things they have to fill out and turn in at the higher grades too. We need to have them teaching and not so much do it. So to do that, you lower the class size, and I think that'll be helpful. It would be something that's funded over time, however, as the McCleary is and as some of the other things. And remember that there'll be some that want tax increases. My opponent has said she'd be fine with a gas tax increase, but said that at several places. But if there's a tax increase for education or gas tax, it will always go back to the people for a vote, and it will fail. So you are pressuring the people in Olympia to get this done without raising taxes. Good thing.
Dahlquist.
Thank you. In regards to 1351, I'm surprised my opponent supports it, because it is about a $3 to $4 billion price tag comes attached with it. I advocate for initiatives that have a price tag, so when the people are voting for it, they know actually how much it costs. It's like going to Gamblin's and buying a car and not Tyson never telling you how much the thing costs until you walk out the door and you get the bill later. So I think it's really important. I do think reduced class size does have an effect on outcomes. But right now, in this particular time, it's an initiative that I cannot support. We have McCleary ahead of us, which is about $3 billion of investments that we need to make. And if we're really going to go after more dollars, I think that the most important and the most effective outcome that we could have is looking at a age 3 through 23 type system. So we're talking about early learning and higher ed, and incorporating that into more of a basic education funding formula, as opposed to reducing class size in K-12. As lofty a goal as that would be, I think it's more important to start earlier with our youngest students and continue on with the college-age students. 70% of the jobs right now that are in Washington State require a 4-year degree. So it's really important that we, as a state, step up to help those students who are trying to get that training, so the jobs that are here, we can employ our own students. So that's where I'd be. The other point is, as far as what's the solution in funding McCleary, the September economic forecast increased about $163 million, about an 8.7% increase. And also, Drew Stokesbary spoke about, I call it the pot for tots. It's about $63 million of revenue that would also go into education.
Mr. Sando.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation. The fact of the matter is that if you look at class size, you look at per student funding in this state, and we're in the middle of the pack of all the states that fund K-12 education. Yet we're at the bottom of the heap as far as class size. So where's the money going? When we say that the class size doesn't matter and that it doesn't affect outcomes, let's define what an outcome is. Is an outcome a test on a standardized, nationalized, standardized test? Is that the outcome that we're talking about? Because maybe I could have 45 kids in my English class and get those kids to pass a standardized test. But I don't think that's the outcome that we started talking about in 1993 when we passed House Bill 1201. We passed that bill because the businesses in our state and the communities in our state said, we're not getting the outcome, which is we're not getting the workforce that we desire. That's the outcome. And so if let's truly look at what the outcome we want to have our kids have when they leave our school system and they go into higher education. Do we want them to be successful in life? Do we want them to be successful and have the tools and the skills to be able to tackle those complex tasks and to be able to do those wonderful things that these kids are going to do, by the way? But it's the outcome 5-10 years from now, not a score on a standardized test. And when we finally realize that, we're going to have to, one of the first votes I think that the legislature is going to have to tackle, because I agree with Senator Roach when she says this initiative is going to pass, because the people are demanding that we do a better job, and it's going to take the whole we're going to have to combine all of these things and address all of these problems at once. And one of the votes is probably going to have to be to address the shortcomings of the initiative. But to say that class size doesn't matter and outcomes, and let's know what that outcome we want to have is.
Great, thank you. So we're going to try to rush through. Well, and I'm sorry, Ms. Ritchie, do you have any comments on either 1351 and or?
I'll just say briefly, I support 1351, but more importantly, as far as Common Core is concerned, as relates to kids, and I have 2 kids in Issaquah Public Schools, and there is not enough, not even close to enough teacher involvement in building curriculum and implementing Common Core initiative. That is my big issue as far as it relates to state implementation level. We don't bring in teachers enough, and teachers, they are the middle class income earners that I'm talking about, and every time I talk to groups like this. So we need to have more teacher involvement.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask one more sort of broad group question for everybody to talk about. And, you know, obviously, next to McCleary, probably the second biggest issue that people keep talking about is transportation. And when you look at some of the infrastructure challenges that we have as a region, transportation is quickly becoming an impediment to some of the economic growth that as a region we're really striving for. And so maybe Mr. Sando, we'll talk to you. Transportation package, is it going to happen this session? And what are in the 2 minutes you have, what are your views on prioritizations?
Oh, I could solve that problem in 2 minutes. The transportation issues is we do need to come together and find out how we're going to properly fund our transportation program. We've got so many shortcomings. We have 37-cent gas tax. Okay, 13 cents of that is dedicated to new projects. Okay, we've got in our district one of the biggest projects. Well, it affects our district because a lot of our district is dependent upon manufacturing down in Auburn and in the Sumner area, and it's difficult for that manufacturing in those warehouses. I don't know if you've been down to the super mall where all those warehouses are. It's difficult for those warehouses and all those manufacturing to get to the port at Tacoma. They're combining the ports, that we're growing, we're going to realize economic growth. We need to make that investment. We need to make that investment in our local communities as well. Local governments are struggling because we've been capped so much on what we're able to do, and we're dependent upon the state to do their job in funding transportation, and we're dependent upon ourselves to raise car tab fees and these other things, which I oppose because I don't think that's a fair tax for transportation. So logically, there's got to be some kind of compromise, some kind of way that we can get together and agree. And if it takes a vote of the people, then perhaps we should do that. But we're going to have to figure out a way that we can fund these investments, because we're not going to realize the economic growth that we can and feed this recovery that's happening. And it's happening now, and we should be excited about it, and we should be willing to step up to the plate, make those investments, grow our economy, and get people moving. I mean, get people moving literally and figuratively, because it's important to our economy and it's important to our future.
Dahlquist.
Thank you. Transportation is the other hot button for the next legislative session. It's a budget that came a package. There's two things in the transportation budget, which is a completely separate budget than the general fund budget where education comes from. So let's make sure we all understand. The state deals with three separate, entirely separate budgets. The general fund, where education comes from, transportation, and then capital, where all kinds of different projects are built. So you understand that. So transportation is totally separate. I do support a package coming forward that prioritizes the 167 corridor. It goes up 167 and expands the lanes there. And what that means for you is that we get vehicles and container trucks moving out of the Port of Tacoma through 167, all the way through the Kent Valley. That's what one of our economic drivers for Washington State, when we get those container trucks moving to the Midwest. That's how this state makes money. So it is highly important that we get this project done. I sat on the 167 task force. We sit there and we look at maps and how many lanes do we need, and should we toll it, should we not toll it? Do we charge container trucks more? Do we charge them less? How do we get there? So the projects are easy to prioritize. How do we pay for it? We had a vote to the people in King County, and King County said, no, we don't want to pay more for transportation. But what we found out, the majority of the people in this district don't get a big benefit from those transit dollars, so riding the bus or getting on Sound Transit. So we don't see the value, so we vote no. What I would implement is something that Mr. Ennis, who's sitting here in the audience today, who works transportation issues through the Association of Washington Business and is a local resident, came up with. And what he says is 1 cent per gallon over an implementation of 5 years gets us to fund the priority projects, and so that's what I would support.
Great, thank you. Mr. Ritchie, I'll come back to you with another question here in just a second. Senator Roach.
Yeah, but the package before us wasn't a 1 cent. It was like a 12 cent. But first of all, before I start, my opponent started her last statement by saying she was surprised that I supported 1351. I would like you all to go back home, listen to that tape, and see if I said I supported it. What I said was I thought it would pass and I would work for its implementation. There's a whole difference. I don't like people putting words in my mouth. Now, when it comes to transportation, I think it's really important that you know this. I've been actively involved in working for a solution. When we started session last year, it was all about the CRC, something you probably don't know about, the Columbia River Crossing. And the governor of the state of Washington wanted to put over $1 billion into the Columbia River Crossing, a new bridge, a second bridge, that would only have saved 1 minute in commute time. It was a huge boondoggle. And we had the U.S. Department of Transportation head and the governor of the state of Washington in our caucus at my suggestion to let him know what the people of the state of Washington, because we represent all areas in the state, felt about this. It took a lot of work, but we got that off the table, put 167 on it. I participate in a group called the Pierce County, it's a Pierce County Coalition, and we meet on many issues, and 167, where it needs to be brought into the port, is something that's in Pierce County portion of our district. So I'm actively involved in that. There were the votes on the Senate floor to pass the tax this year. I was not voting for it, but the votes were there. You would have had the transportation improvements. The Democrats, actually, in the embodiment of Senator Tracy Ide, who co-chaired the Transportation Committee, stood up and said, we don't like these reforms. So when we're talking about, and so killed the bill. You could have had it. It would have gone to the people for a vote, but you could have had the bill, and that's what we're talking about. So the bottom line is that we can have a package, one that has more public input, I believe, and one that you'll be able to support because it'll get to the projects. Thank you.
Stokesbary.
You know, to answer the question, I'm not sure if it's going to happen right now, but eventually, in the near future, a package will happen. And as your representative, I've got several goals for an eventual package. The first is that I want to make sure the package contains money to complete 167. They were talking about completing 167 before I was born, so it's a little sad that I'm going to grow up, run for office, and vote in the legislature to fund 167. It's taken that long, but I want to make sure we get it done. The second is I want to make sure there's adequate money for not just new road construction, but road maintenance, especially out here in Enumclaw. We're very dependent on a couple state highways, and if one of those were to fail, we'd be in big trouble. So I want to make sure that we're able to maintain the roads and there's not another Skagit River Valley Bridge collapse down here. And then my third priority, and that's really the biggest one, is I want to protect the taxpayer money in a package. If we're getting $8 billion worth of roads, I want to make sure that we're only charging taxpayers $8 billion, not $10 or $12 billion. And let me explain how that's going to work. The first is when in the transportation budget, Washington charges itself sales tax on goods that it buys to build roads. 45 other states don't do that. It's arguably unconstitutional, but we do it, and it inflates the price of roads by 5 to 10%. I want to eliminate that and bring the cost of roads down by maybe $500 million or so. The second is prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is a very noble goal, but it's a little bit duplicative with minimum wage. Washington already has the highest minimum wage in the country, and having a separate prevailing wage system on top of that really increases costs for taxpayers. It puts small businesses in jeopardy because they can't compete on wages. They have to compete on other things like materials, and when they're very small, they can't buy those materials in bulk, so it harms small businesses. There was a proposal last year that I would support that wouldn't get rid of prevailing wage, but only require prevailing wage to be met for projects over $250 million instead of projects over $125 million. That would save the state a lot of money, but still allow prevailing wage to exist. Lastly, with regard to environmental protections, when the Skagit River Bridge did collapse, it was replaced within a matter of months instead of a matter of years. Obviously, we have the ability to do that. We just need to have the will to do that, and I'll make sure that the departments work that way in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
What I do is Clean Water Act compliance right now. And I said, I tell people, which was actually one of the ways I met Daryl, but you can't play the game if you don't know the rules. One of the rules in the state is if you fill in a wetland, you have to replace it by 2.5 times, but you have to do it within the right-of-way. The most expensive land in the entire state is along the right-of-way. You think the ducks care whether it's in a right-of-way or a half a mile away or a quarter mile away? It makes sense to mitigate the impact environmentally, but it does not make sense to have to do that in the most expensive land that you're building a road on. So you could do that within the same drainage area, the same drainage basin. That's a reform. Drew mentioned paying sales tax. The reason that the state charges sales tax to itself when it does a project is so when the federal government does a project, they can charge the feds money. And they net $2 or $3 or $10 or $20 million a year in additional sales tax revenue. In effect, I want you to think about it when people say that building a road hurts education, which is the first thing they say when you want to use sales tax dollars. I don't know why transit doesn't hurt education, but building roads does. But they're taking financed money. When Drew says violates the Constitution, the 18th Amendment of the Constitution says you put money in the gas tax account, that money goes to build roads. They're charging sales tax, in effect putting money into the general fund with finance dollars. 14 years ago, I ran a bill that would have taken that money along with the sales tax generated from the sale of motor vehicles to fund transportation. Finishing 167 is nice, but if you don't finish 167, widen 167, widen Route 18 going through Auburn, and finish Route 18 at the other end, you haven't completed that loop to get things to eastern Washington and things like that from the port. And if you did all that, you would use up the entire amount of gas tax that they're proposed. So you need to have a funding mechanism that's going to really provide some revenue more than what they're proposing.
Great. Thank you. And Mr. Ritchie, not to leave you out of the discussion of education, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act has not been reauthorized for the last 12 years. And from my time in Washington, D.C., I know that the Workforce Investment Act, which supports a lot of vocational training for students, has not been reauthorized for probably close to 2 decades. So that being said, do you support the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Workforce Investment Act, and what other priorities do you see the federal government playing, or what other role, I guess I should say, do you see the federal government playing in supporting local education?
I support the reauthorization of both immediately. I mentioned before, I taught at the community college level. I think we spend a lot of time getting kids ready for 4-year college and not enough time getting kids like me ready for a 2-year college. That focus isn't there. I talked to my son about this and friends and family about this. The purpose of our education system, K through 12, as Cathy mentioned, the outcomes, as Mike mentioned, the outcome-based goals here. where are you going to get a job that is not exportable? There are a ton of software engineers in India and China that speak English that are working for a lot lower pay rate than we do here. You can't export a carpenter. You can't export a plumber. You can't export a nurse. You can't export a teacher. These jobs are long-term, stable, middle-class, living wage jobs in our community that we need to continue to build on those skills to make sure those people are here, to make sure those jobs are what we're investing our education dollars into. There is way too much politics in D.C. When we get to a point, I'll have to say this, we get to a point where we can't even reauthorize, which means pay for again, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or essentially the community college, trade schools, that funding mechanism, something has gone really wrong with the system. And I mean, I'm a throw all the bums out kind of guy. I think that when you get to that level of corruption, that level of politics, that level of just disconnection with the community, something has to change. And that's why I'm running. That's why I'm trying to be part of it. I'm a teacher, I'm a business owner, and we need to bring people in that understand that education, outcome-based education, getting people to middle-class living wage jobs skill level is our primary responsibility in this generation, and I'm going to be fighting for it as long as you'll have me.
Great, thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left, and there's a bunch of questions we want to get through. So I'm going to ask, the next question I'm going to ask you to be very brief in your responses. Everybody's done a great job following directions so far, sticking to time limits. So the question I have, with a number of folks in the audience representing small business and this event being sponsored by the Enumclaw Chamber of Commerce, what is one initiative that you believe the state can do, or what is one initiative that you will propose as a state representative to help grow small businesses in this region? So, Mr. Fortunato, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, I know that everybody's relying on the B&O tax revenue to help fund education, but I hate that tax with a passion. I go, this is a tax that taxes you for the privilege of doing business in Washington to lose money. So at the very least, we should make that, if we're going to keep the B&O tax, we should modify it so that you can deduct your losses and things like that. Right now, you can buy something for $100, try to sell it for $200, fire sale it for $50 and pay a tax on it. I mean, that to me is sort of unfair, and it stymies business, and it incenses me every quarter when I write that B&O check. So we need to look at one of the bills that I passed in a bipartisan way in Olympia was to simplify tax reporting and things like that. So we need to be looking at some of those regulations. And again, you know, if every state agency came into your office, you could not stay in business. So we need to have a system in place that reduces some of those regulations. A regulation on business is really just another tax. They want you to do something that they want you to do and spend your money to do it. So, I mean, that's just a tax. So we got to be looking at that kind of stuff.
Right.
And that's the number one reason businesses go out is underfinancing followed by regulation.
Right, thank you. Again, trying to be brief, Mr. Stokesbary.
You know, as an attorney who helps small businesses and as somebody who has an economics degree, these kinds of issues are really my bread and butter. This is what I'll be really excited to work on in Olympia. So let me just give you one example, and that's the state's L&I workers' comp system. Washington is one of the only states in the union to prohibit private workers' comp insurance. Department of Labor and Industries has essentially a state-granted monopoly. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to blame every single one of our problems on a big government bureaucracy. I know that Microsoft and Boeing can have big bureaucracies as well. But if you own a small business, you've dealt with L&I, and you know that they're not winning any awards for customer satisfaction. So I think reforming L&I is one of the ways that can help businesses succeed and let businesses focus on doing what businesses do. We need to apply a flat rate on wages in calculating L&I premiums instead of the system we have now. We need to expand the use of claims resolution settlements. There's a variety of reforms in the department like that we can pursue that will reduce the burden on businesses while still protecting workers, but let businesses continue to do their business and hire more workers, which will grow the economy.
Thank you. Senator Roach, yes, please.
Yeah, I think we all play to our strengths. First of all, because I have been endorsed by the Association of Washington Business and NFIB. I have a lot of support among the business community, but also among labor, because they are the ones that usually build the things that come about as we grow. So as chair of the Governmental Operations Committee, I have undertaken now, and I'm in the middle of undertaking the task of reviewing the Growth Management Act, something that was put in place some 25 years ago, never been reviewed. Neither has the Shoreline Management Act. The economy of the state of Washington will grow at a faster rate if we're able to sync up some of these laws with today's building capabilities. There are a finite number of lots. For instance, in King County, the buildable lands report shows 35,000 lots left. That's it. And when those are built out, there isn't another place to grow. So we're going to have to be looking at these things. And when a house is built, somebody's got to buy the wood, somebody's got to buy the nails, somebody's got to prepare the property someone's got to put the sewers in. A lot of things happen, and small business will grow. One of the things you need to remember is that we have no income tax in Washington State. That means we have no personal income tax. It also means we have no corporate income tax. So our system, which is unlike Oregon's, and Oregon isn't doing as well as we are, by the way. They have an income tax on sales, or excuse me, on businesses and on individuals. We don't, and we have a better growth rate than they do. So we want to be careful with what we tinker, but we need to be addressing the needs. I agree that we need to look at the B&O tax, and I do think that we need to be looking at when we tax gross and receipts and so forth, because we need to make sure that it's a fair system for all of us to. And I think that by doing that, we'll actually help business and help the state of Washington. So those would be some of my comments.
Great, thank you. Representative Dahlquist.
Thank you. I want to talk specifically about the business and B&O tax. Basically, we need to simplify and make it more fair. It's something that I have worked on. I sit on a committee called the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. It's a lot of words, and actually I have a hearing today at 1 o'clock in Olympia. And what we do on that committee is we review every single tax incentive that's given to businesses in Washington State. And then recommendations are given to the legislature. Is this an incentive that we want to continue? Is this something that should expire? How many people are taking advantage of it? How many jobs did it actually create? So I am honored to sit on there and to actually see what jobs we've created and what incentivizes people to grow. But again, simplifying and making it fair and equitable in the B&O tax, it to me is the most important. There always seems to be an attack on small business. And as a small business owner for 12 years, I know what that feels like. The latest one that came through the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee was basically a sales tax increase on service providers. So those of us who are professional service providers, whether you be an accountant or an attorney or an architect or just have a lawn maintenance company, you are going to be charged a higher tax on your business. So it's one of those things, again, simplifying and making it fair.
Thank you. Mr. Sando.
I would like to echo what I opened with as far as regulatory reform and give you an example of what that could look like. I use the analogy of a stoplight. Right? And so when we have businesses and we have small businesses, right now we tend to give them a red light. Stop, make sure that you do all these things. We're not even to a yellow light yet. What I'd like to do is see us give small businesses and those folks a green light. For example, what we did here in the city, I like to claim credit for it, but it was the hard work of a lot of other people on the Planning Commission and on the City Council prior to my joining them, where they simplified the zoning restrictions or the zoning things. And we put together a matrix, or they put together a matrix of what they can do, where they can build it, and gave them a lot easier idea of what the city regulation is. And I think that that's something that we should try to emulate moving forward and moving to the state level, is figuring out a way to make it so that you have one-stop shopping. You give the businesses that think they have a yellow light, they should be able to find a place where the state or local governments can give them a green light to grow, a green light to hire, a green light to build, a green light to make the economy more strong. And I think that that's what's really important, is give those small businesses and give those economic drivers a green light, and let's get down the highway.
Perfect, thank you. So for the last three issues I want to talk about, we're going to do a show of hands. So first, Initiative 594, which would require background checks on the sale of all guns in the state of Washington. If you support I-594, would you please raise your hand? We have audience participation as well. Initiative 591, which would require the state to due process for the confiscation of guns in the state of Washington. If you support I-591, would you please raise your hand? No audience participation on this one. And last one, and one of the things that was alluded to quite often from a revenue standpoint, if you support a state income tax, would you please raise your hand? Great. Well, I want to thank you all this morning. I want to thank the candidates for taking time this morning. This has been hopefully a very informative session for you all. On behalf of Puget Sound Energy, we're a proud partner of the Enumclaw Chamber, the Green River Community College, and are looking forward to the next 3 weeks and the dialogue that will ensue. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Tyson Gamble, who's the president of the Enumclaw Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all very much.
All right, we're almost done. You guys can get out of here off to your next class. But I have a few things. My name is Tyson Gamblin. I'm the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all for coming out this morning. Some things that we have coming up, I just wanted to make sure that you have on your agenda or on your calendars at home. Our next chamber meeting is Tuesday, October 21st at 8 o'clock at the Park Center Hotel. All the community is welcome to come. We'd love to have you out. We have our downtown trick-or-treating, which is on Friday, October 31st. So it's a lot of fun. A lot of our businesses in town hand out candy. It's always a lot of fun. So you might want to dress up for that. And don't want to forget, Tuesday, November 4th is what day? Election Day. So make sure you go out and vote on that. And then we have our winter wine walk on Saturday, November 22nd. You can buy your tickets on the Chamber's website for that. It's a lot of fun. We have a lot of local wineries and stuff like that. Students, I'm sorry, you have to be 21 to participate, but we want to thank everyone again for coming out, and we look forward to a great election day in November.
Thank you very much.